Quicksilver, a card-driven game of racing in a steampunk universe. So you have the Victorian things, the Victorian culture, the Victorian references with strange technology, and in this case with air balloons and flying machines that will, well, go around the board and try to win a race. And in this case I placed the starting line there. And it's neat because the starting and finishing line can be placed anywhere on the board. Actually, you can just use the board any way you want. You can race to go from one side to the other, to loop around, to do multiple loops. Complete freedom to rearrange your racing areas and your racing goals every time that you play the game. Huge replay value from that. Even more so when you realize that actually the board is double-sided. There are two sides. The data side is the one that is recommended for beginners. It is a side with less obstacles, and it is, well, to me is less fun than this one. I really love this one. As you can see, it's full of buildings. Let's just say that the areas that are delimited by red hex sites are areas that you do not want to bump into, so you will kind of have to move around and do some tricky maneuvers here and there. Really fun. Now, each player has a vehicle such as this one, more or less, will be placed on the board. The game is great component-wise. My only complaint is the basis of the aircraft, because in this game orientation is extremely important, and it would be much easier to keep track of orientation if the bases of these aircraft were shaped as axes or even as squares. With circles, sometimes things can be a little ambiguous. Then you just have to remind players to make sure that their aircraft is facing a specific, clearly identifiable X side. And when you do that, you sound annoying. So, well, that could have been better. Very small detail, though. I'm just telling you about it because I'm incredibly pedantic. Each player has starships, such as airships, such as this one on the board. Each player has a display that will keep track of the level of armor. They'll start with 4, then when you take damage, the level of armor goes down. You may recover it through certain game effects. If the level of armor goes down to 0, then you have to stop, your velocity drops to stop, you skip a turn, and then you're able to repair to some extent your airship, and you're still in the game. You're not entirely out of the game. Velocity keeps track of your, well, speed. You start from stop, and at the beginning of each turn, when it is your turn, you can adjust your speed by 1 level. The level of speed indicates the number of dice that you roll. In this case, we have 1, 2, or 3, depending on the speed that you're using. Danger, yes, you roll 3 dice each time that you move. It is extremely dangerous and fast, but also very expensive. You have to discard 2 cards from your hand every time that you use it, but there will be times in which it will be wise to invest and go on danger velocity. 2 fast is kind of the standard procedure, standard speed. But actually, when you are playing on this board, sometimes you may even want to go slow. On the other board, I never go slow. Cards. Each player has a hand of 5 cards that can be played for their numerical value or for their effect. The effect is self-explanatory. You can play the card whenever the effect of the card applies. Some cards can be played during your turn. Some cards will annul the effect of cards that the opponent is playing. Some cards will allow you to move better, and some cards will allow you to attack the opponent. A lot of possible effects here. In any case, the standard sequence of your turn will be: first, you can adjust your speed by 1 level. Then you roll a number of dice that will depend on the speed that you are at. In this case, I roll a 7, which is the number of movement points that I have, and that can be modified by play of 1 card. 1 card only during movement, 1 card I can play for its numerical value, and I can add or subtract that numerical value to my total speed. As a start movement, I can also spend a movement point to pivot my airship by 60 degrees without any penalty, or by 120 degrees, in which case, however, I lose a point of armor because of the stress that the structure of the airship takes. And after I've done my pivoting, if I choose to do it, I have to move by all of my remaining movement points in a straight line as much as possible. If I bump into things, then I get a penalty, my velocity goes down to 0, I lose a point of armor, but I have to try to move as much as I can. Unless there are card effects that will allow me, say, to maybe slow down, to pull the brake, to slide, to take sort of like a side step to avoid things. There are many possible effects. Some possible effects that the cards will allow you to perform are attacks. Usually attacks have a certain range. You can attack things that are within a certain range. The instructions don't say that you have to have a line of sight to the opponent, but I am a wargamer, I have principles. If you play with me, you'd better have a line of sight. You're not going to be able to fire into or through clouds, unless the opponent is at the edge of the cloud. Again, because there's certain things that you just have to do. That's what happens when you play with a wargamer. You can attack the opponent if you have a line of sight, in my version, and a card allows you to do so. When you resolve an attack, both players roll dice, and then both players can play as many cards as they want to add the numerical value of the card to the attack. And the attacker is trying to exceed the total of the opponent, or the defender. Now, the rules don't really say who plays cards when. It sounds like players can just play cards whenever. Like, you play a card, they see if you play a card, then they play one. Then maybe also play another one, then da-da-da-da. Too confusing for me. We house ruled that the attacker has to play all the cards that he wants to play, then the defender gets to play cards. Again, it's sort of like a rule that it's very common in war games. If you're spending resources to get bonuses, the attacker commits those. It's an interesting challenge because then the attacker may choose to waste the resources pretty much to launch a killer attack. It's a nice challenge for the attacker that has to budget resources well. And if an attack is successful, the target ship loses a point of armor. These are really the basics. This is such a simple, light game. Players decide on the circuit, on the areas that they want to cover during the race. During setup, you can add obstacles to change even further the board, for example, by adding extra clouds, mines, floating mines. There can be turrets that automatically fire on ships that go close to them. A lot of things can happen. Actually, I was talking about attacks earlier. Another way of attacking is by ramming the opponent. You can move through the next where an opponent is, and you can choose to play a card. You discard a card and nothing happens. That simply allows you to move through the hex of the opponent. Otherwise, you're ramming the opponent, and that is resolved like an attack. As I was saying, very simple game. It is a racing game. The winner is the player that gets first to whatever final point, to whatever finishing line the players have agreed on. It's a fun game. It really is a fun game. When it comes to racing games, I'm not an expert, but I can tell that this is a game that I really enjoyed playing. The flexibility and freedom that the cards give you is great. You can invest a lot of resources, spend all of your cards in a turn to gain great advantage. Other players may play more conservatively. Yes, there is a luck factor. If you keep rolling twos all during the entire game, I do not know that the cards will be able to change the overall outcome for you. But cases where luck really is the only factor, the main factor, should not surface too often. At least I haven't seen any of those. I really had the sense that sometimes the dice would be unkind to somebody, but rarely was that the only factor. Well, actually, never was that the only factor to determine the outcome of the game. if I thought back about the games that I played, I could see how even players that are not done very well could have played their cards better, could have taken different types of chances, could have made different decisions. Luck is there, not too much of it in my taste. The game, however, changes feeling entirely based on the number of players that you have. 2 players, the game is possible, can be played, but it may not be all that exciting because you may have, in that case, a runaway leader problem. Yes, you may have cases in which one of the players, when you have only 2 players, really gets a good advantage and the player is behind, and there isn't much that the player can do. At that point, the player that has advantage may even choose to be not very careful and bump into stuff and not really worry about it, because in a 2-player game you will not have many chances of really getting your ship destroyed. You can bump into things 1 or 2 times and the game is still kind of forgiving. The feel of the game is completely different when you have more than 2 players, say 4 players. Then, especially on this side of the board, the players are getting in each other's way. They have many more chances of attacking each other. If a player is sort of like leading the pack and starts running faster towards the finishing line, that a player can gang up against that player. If everybody starts shooting consistently at the leader, there are good chances the leader will go down. So there is a self-balancing mechanism in a multiplayer game, 4 or more, that really makes the game good. Of course, you may have the problem of downtime, but maybe just only the first time that you play the game, when players don't know what the cards do and they spend time reading the cards. You can have a 4 or 5 player game, and when players are familiar with the cards, you will have still very low, if any, downtime. Players will get a sense of what they want to do, roll the dice and try to do it, and the game goes around real fast. Fun game. I really enjoyed playing it. It looks really good. The components are really carefully made. They look great. The flow of the game, the pace of the game is exciting, especially again if you have enough players to create a lot of action, players bumping into each other, firing at each other, trying to stab each other's back, then the game is really, really good. It really shines. I would not necessarily recommend it as a 2-player game. It is cute that way, but not much more than that. Otherwise, if you have a good bunch of people that enjoy racing games, this is a really good choice. Huge replay value. Definitely, there's just so much that you can do with the 2 boards, with the mobile components. I mean, the elements that you can add, different ways that you can use the board from game to game. A lot of fun. Quicksilver, I definitely enjoyed this game. Fun, and I'm not usually a racing game guy, but I really was convinced by this one. Good game. Very good game, actually.